Hi everyone, welcome back to AmeritechTalks. I'm Christina, as usual, Growth and Community Manager here at Ameritech, and today we are diving into a topic at the heart of responsible AI, how enterprises can launch AI systems with confidence and integrity. Our guest is Aleksandar Jevtic, CEO of TrustVector, a firm dedicated to advancing trust between humans and machines. Alexander recently wrote a compelling article, Avoid AI Disasters: 5 Critical Evaluations for Responsible AI System Launch. And we couldn't be more excited to dig into it. Welcome, Alexander. Thanks for joining us. Could you start us by telling us a bit more about yourself and TrustVector and what inspired you to create this guide on AI system launches?
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here and to talk about a topic that is really near and dear to my heart, and I think should be near and dear to everybody else's. So thank you for giving me the platform to actually share this thoughts with your viewers and everybody else around there. So as you said, I'm Aleksandar Jevtic, CEO and co-founder of TrustVector. I'm also Chief AI Ethics Officer at TrustVector. I've spent 20 years in digital transformations, working with Fortune 100 companies, primarily in health industries. Spent a lot of time working with, C-suite, figuring out what these transformations are going to look like and how to actually implement them. And I had a unique opportunity to work with Big Four consulting companies and sit in these board meetings and sit with organizations and really kind of lead organizations on this path, not just from the strategy standpoint, but being able to actually figure out how to actually execute those strategies and even implement digital transformations. So I've had the privilege to see everything from kind of the idea and starting these big transformations into actual development of systems and delivery of those systems. About 4 years ago, I was on a path of thinking a little bit about what it is that I want to do next besides digital transformations. And my co-founder, Dr. Sonia Petrovich, who is a professor of statistics and applied math here at Illinois Institute of Technology, prior to that, she was a professor at Penn State. She came to me with this idea about thinking about artificial intelligence solutions and the need to actually audit these solutions. And I started looking into it and started looking into really the negative effects that were happening from artificial intelligence. And I was really worried, and I was really struck by the number of unintended consequences and negative outcomes of such a powerful technology. I'm a physicist by background and a computer scientist by training. And I was shocked when I found out the types of negative things that are coming out of use of artificial intelligence when we have this really, really, really great, powerful tool in our disposal. We should not be doing wrong things. We should not be hurting patients. We should not be hurting humans. We should really do some wonderful things. And we realized that the problem existed because a lot of organizations didn't really know how to look at this concept of trustworthiness of artificial intelligence. There came the idea for TrustVector, an organization that really, as you said, at the core of its mission is there to advance trust between humans and machines. And in that process, really help organizations stop the unintended consequences, identify risks early, and then mitigate them before they actually become reality. So we've really focused on that mission. We work with organizations across different sectors, but we really take that lens of how do we help you find out where the risks are? How do we stop those risks? How do we make sure that ultimately you're innovating responsibly? That's really our goal for organizations that we work with really closely.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Honestly, that sounds already very intriguing. But before that, I would also like to introduce our very special guest that I'm sure everyone already know. That is Greg Ross, our CEO and co-founder of Ameritech. And he's been driving the force behind our purpose. And Greg, welcome. Hi.
Hi, Christina. It's great to see you. Thanks for having me back on. Hey, Alexander, good to see you too. So I'm really excited about this. I always say I'm on the edge of my seat, but today I am, even though I don't have a seat. I'm really on the edge of whatever it is because I've been in risk, compliance, and ethics for the last 20 years. So hearing about how ethics is evolving to suit this emergence and proliferation of AI is one of the topics I'm really fascinated about. So Alexander, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for letting me sit in on this fascinating conversation today.
Excited to have you, Greg. Thank you.
Great. So now into our very core discussion. So, Alexander, You highlight data quality and lifecycle management. In your experience, what are the most overlooked aspects of data hygiene before launch?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, there are so many elements for it to really think about when it comes to creating systems, and especially AI systems. And AI and data, of course, they go hand in hand, right? Data is the lifeline to AI. If we didn't have data, we would not have AI. And as in the old days of systems design and system implementation, right, bad data leads to bad results. Well, this is now even more amplified when it comes to artificial intelligence, because you really, really have to have good quality data. And I see that a lot of organizations are even now still struggling with getting good quality data in order to actually run the AI systems on top of that. So, it is really critical to think about very early on in the early stages of thinking about artificial intelligence and the solution itself, how to get the right quality data. In certain industries, this is not necessarily easy. Actually, there are industries that have been struggling with this for a very long time. Healthcare is a perfect example, where data is not all in the same format. It comes from multiple different vendors. There's a lot of work required to actually get the data really in a good spot and get it to be good quality. But there's a lot of emphasis on that is absolutely needed to make sure that data can actually be used for the AI solutions. The next thing that I see a lot of organizations not spend enough time on, and they really need to spend time on when it comes to data, is really analyzing their data sets and making sure that these data sets are not only good quality, but also are not biased, and that they're not introducing negative effects when it comes to actually using it, right? Because now we're dealing with a situation, not only bad data is bad outcome, we actually deal with a situation where bad data and biased data can lead to regulatory issues and legal troubles for organizations. So it's really important to prioritize those aspects when organizations start to think about these components.
Alexander, real quickly,
I
have a question about that. That's so interesting. So I think most people, when they hear artificial intelligence, that's not synonymous with bias in their mind. They're thinking about machines that are making decisions. How does that bias get into this world where artificial intelligence is making calculations and decisions? How does that even happen?
Yeah, wonderful question. We're all inherently biased. If I asked you whether you like vanilla ice cream or chocolate ice cream, likely you would say one or the other, right? And I could claim that you're biased, therefore, right? Your choice is biased, and that's natural, that's normal. The problem is that all of those biases that some of them we're aware of, some of them we're not aware of, have made their way into the data that we have collected. And they have also made their way into the ways in which we have collected the data. So for example, if you are, for example, trying to develop, let's say, a policing policy, right, and how you're going to deploy your police force in a particular city. If you're using data, for example, from the old times and the notes from the old police reports and everything else, all of the data is likely biased. A lot of areas, for example, Chicago, where I live, have been policed by predominantly white police officers. And a lot of negative data and negative bias is in those data sets, especially if they were policing, let's say, predominantly Black neighborhoods. So there's this really, really, really important aspect that needs to be looked at, right? We cannot just say, well, we got the data probably was looked at and it's cleansed in its quality. There's this aspect of looking at that bias and how it made it in there. So a lot of it comes from us and the way that data is collected. And a lot of times you don't have a way to control that. You basically are maybe buying a data set that may be biased, but you do have a control over making sure that it's not biased. And if it is biased, ensuring that it actually becomes non-biased by using specific techniques to unbias the data. However, sometimes your data needs to be biased. If you're dealing with the breast cancer, for example, algorithm, you need to have data that is obviously biased towards that it has all the properties of breast cancer, not some other kind of data set, right? So there's what we like to call in the ethics community good and bad bias, right? There's good elements of it and the bad types of biases that we need to be really cognizant of and really think how to actually combine those in the right way and counteract the negative effects of it.
Fascinating. Okay. Thank you.
It is. So one of your key points that you've actually just right now mentioned, they call for rigorous testing beyond accuracies of fairness, safety, and robustness. So can you share an example when a failure have had real-world implications?
There are so many examples. We could be here for such a long time, I think, because all of this is really well connected. But yeah, that testing aspect, as you said, becomes really, really critical. So I'll give you some examples that are probably going to blow your mind because they're so rudimentary, let's say. So there's a well-documented case of an AI solution that uses computer vision to basically allow you to scan your skin and detect moles on your skin. And based on the type of a mole, the system is able to tell you whether your mole is likely malignant or not, right? So whether you potentially have cancer or not. So there's some risk profile. Well, when that system was deployed into actual use by the doctors, it was found that it was really, really, really not doing well when it came to dark skin population. And it turned out that during the testing and the development of the system, the actual data that it was tested on, it was predominantly of white skin population. It actually didn't have dark skin population. So of course the system didn't work well, right, in dark skin population. Now, this is really, you would say, rudimentary, right? You would say, well, wait a minute, why would you do that? Could have, should have, would have. That's the reality. It has actually happened. And this is just one really simple example where the system actually wasn't able to do well, right? And it was a failure at data selection. It was a failure at testing to not be able to recognize all of this. But then there are like really complex situations where even the testing itself was not created properly to actually catch all of the issues. So, in 2019, for example, there was an issue in the United States where there was a hospital system that deployed AI to basically predict and recommend, I should say, treatments for patients. It worked really well. It was able to, get hundreds of data points about their patients and recommend the procedures. But over time, they've noticed that the system was recommending procedures to one group of patients, but it was not recommending the procedures to another group of patients. Now, these two groups of patients had clinically the same picture, but something was going on with the system. After a lot of digging and trying to see what's going on, they've realized that in the process of actually creating this system, they've used some of these proxy variables, as they're called, to estimate certain aspects that didn't have information on. They couldn't really figure out how to determine the need for a procedure. So they looked at past procedures, and based on the past procedures, looked at how much those procedures have costed and so on and so forth. And they use that as a proxy for the need. Well, what happened is that the system assumed incorrectly, it was never trained to do this. It assumed that if the person in the past had a similar procedure and they've paid for it, because in the US, a lot of procedures are paid for, likely those people actually needed a procedure. So when the next time a person of a similar profile came along, the system recommended the procedure, assuming that they were sick and they needed it. But when the person came of an opposite profile where they didn't pay for a procedure in the past and they didn't actually have the procedure, they assumed that this person was healthy. Inadvertently, what happened is that the people that were paying for procedures were predominantly affluent and predominantly white, while the people that didn't have money to pay for procedures were not affluent and were not white. So the system started to discriminate. And here's another example where you could test all you want, all your system on these very fine, defined boxes, but you have to look kind of broadly and see what else could potentially happen and lead to some of these negative consequences.
Oh, that really underscores why testing must go deeper than just pushing metrics, right? Okay, the first pillar focuses on transparency and human oversight. How can enterprises balance explainability with complex models, especially when regulations demand accountability?
Yeah, it's we always kind of when we talk about explainability and transparency, we always say, can you explain what your AI is doing and who is actually in control of it? And it's becoming tougher and tougher, right? The AI started, if we look back just at the machine learning itself, right? It was a little bit easier to explain what's going on. Then, with the generative AI and all of the other components of AI, it's becoming really, really hard to really essentially look inside the black box and see what exactly is going on and understand what is going on. But there are things that can be done that are at a periphery, or at least in the circumference of the systems, that you can still do and make sure that you're still, safe, if you will, and explain, right? So, for example, some of this is very basic. Again, it goes back to maintaining really good documentation and understanding of what sources were included when systems were designed, how the systems were versioned, what data was used, all of the kind of standard things, right? So there's a lot of documentation that can be put together from the get-go of the project throughout the actual implementation of the system, and even once it is live. That's very critical. It is very critical to provide what are called transparency disclosures, meaning if you're developing a chatbot of some sort, to make sure that those that are using that chatbot, they are aware that they're interacting with artificial intelligence system. The line between AI and non-AI is getting really, really blurred. It's really hard these days to distinguish what is going on. And actually, it's really critical to provide this transparency. And it's not only a nice to have, it's actually required by law, for example, by the EU AI Act or other jurisdictions around the world. So it's important to understand. And then it's important for the teams to really use, there are tools in the toolbox of data scientists and developers that they can use to actually understand throughout the development of the models what they're doing. They're called explainability tools. And whenever you use those tools, you can actually see a little bit inside and understand what is going on and what the model is doing, and control it from that standpoint. Pair that with testing and control it from that standpoint. And then final piece, I would say, in the entire puzzle that we can't forget is the need for the human oversight. And I can't underscore this or stress this more, that human oversight is really, really needed. You'll hear sometimes terms human in the loop, for example, right? And that's really what it means is, do you have a human that understands what's going on and that has ability to intervene, to stop, to make a decision based on the recommendation, right? I'll give you a perfect example. For example, in the health insurance in the United States, there's a lot of automation when it comes to claims processing. There are a lot of claims that go through the health insurance. So, organizations have automated all of that process, and you could maybe automate the approval or denial of claims. But there are some very big healthcare insurance organizations that have landed in legal troubles because they have denied claims automatically without human oversight, and people whose claims have been denied actually died because of those claims being denied. So it's really serious, right? Now there are good examples as well. I have some examples of organizations in the same industry that have a very strict rule: no automation of the denial. We can automate the approval, denial cannot be automated. The final stamp and decision has to be of the human. Right, so that's the human in the loop, and how we make sure that transparency and accountability happens. And it's not easy, but it's a really kind of thoughtful process that organizations have to go through to make sure that they are doing all of these steps, if you will, and still comply with the with laws that exist out there.
Yeah, Alexander, quick follow-up question on this topic. So I know you work a lot in the healthcare industry. And when you're dealing with conventional compliance software in a healthcare organization, you have certain regulations that come into play when someone on the technical side goes to find answers in the data, because you might have, personal health information that's listed there. It would seem like that would make this whole transparency and oversight dynamic with AI even more complicated when you have, I'm thinking about HIPAA. I'm thinking about some of these healthcare regulations that we have in America. It would almost make it extremely difficult to get that transparency, wouldn't it? Is there a way to still have visibility into the data?
Yeah, there still is, and you're right. Like HIPAA still applies, right? Like whether you have AI regulations or not, all other regulations are still applicable. But you can still, you can say that maybe the system or the model may be a black box, but everything that goes into it, such as data, you still have visibility into. So you still have to comply with HIPAA and everything else, and make sure that and everything that comes out when it comes to recommendations, you have control. You can put human over there to make sure that they control the output and take action or not take action in certain cases, right? But it does definitely, to your point, Greg, it definitely complicates things. But look, that's the reality. That's where we are, and we just have to deal with it. The worst case scenario is to simply kind of go, well, and I've been in meetings where organizations have said it's a black box. We really don't know what's going on inside, and that's where my red alarm's going to go off, and then I kind of have to get on my pedestal to kind of talk a little bit about, well, we can look outside the black box if we can't see inside and all of the other components.
Right. That's really interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alexander.
Actually, while we're on it, I have another follow-up question, if it's okay. So,
Yeah.
when we are talking about policies, compliance, decommissioning, what governance frameworks are you seeing work best, and how quickly should companies name theirs?
That's a great question. So regulations and governance going to go hand in hand, right? And the bad news, I would say, let's start with the bad news. The bad news is that it's pretty not coherent, I would say, the whole governance and the regulations around the world. Even in the United States, if we look right now, each state is developing its own guidelines and trying to develop the regulations. We're still waiting for some kind of a federal mandate. EU has a little bit different approach. They have a federally mandated law, which helps it. Right? So governance kind of follows that. Right? Governance is absolutely needed because in order to get any of this done, you have to have governance in place. There are frameworks out there, and good news and bad news is there are a lot of frameworks out there. So the bad news is that you have to spend time thinking about what industry you're in, where you're heading with your systems. So let's say that you want to, you're a US company that is deploying systems in Europe. Well, then you have to comply with the UI Act. So you look for frameworks that cover that aspect. Right? My kind of message to organizations in general is that there's enough out there to start. So even if you don't, all of these frameworks are very similar. They cover similar dimensions when it comes to trustworthiness. So whether you're picking in the US NIST risk management framework, which has been around for several years right now and has been evolving, whether you're picking OECD AI responsible framework and their principles, which is more around Europe, whether you're picking IEEE Standards Association. Full disclosure, I'm one of the lead assessors for the IEEE Standards Association when it comes to AI ethics. So I'm not pushing that, but it's one of the dimensions to look at, one of the kind of frameworks to look at. Whichever one of those you look at, you have a good grounding way to work for it. So it's a really complex answer, right? There's not one framework you can choose, but if you kind of overlay your industry, where you're heading and what is your system really doing, it becomes a little bit easier to choose one of these frameworks and move forward. I forgot to mention ISO. Of course, ISO has been developing its own, set of standards, which is also a good one to look at, especially for global organizations. For ISO 42001 and ISO 42005 that just came out recently are good places to look at and understand what do you need when it comes to AI systems and managing them. So that's how we kind of approach it. 5 or 6 of those, and then start to choose and decide kind of which direction to go.
Thank you. What's the biggest barrier you've seen mid-sized firms face when implementing these 5 evaluations from your article?
So mid-sized firms are significantly disadvantaged in this game, and startups too. And the reason is that, as you can see, and we're talking only for a few minutes over here, this is a pretty complex topic to navigate. So big organizations, large enterprises, they have entire responsible AI teams that are set up together. And actually in history, they've put them together, they fired them, they put them together again. They have the luxury to do that. And they can turn almost on a dime if the regulation comes out and they are already prepared to comply with regulations, right? And if you are uncertain which regulation to comply with, you go with the most stringent one. That way you're gonna be safe. Mid-sized organizations don't have that. They don't have that capability, and to find that capability is actually not necessarily easy, but it also can be very expensive to stand up organizations on your own. So I think that's the really, really big, that's probably the biggest challenge for the mid-sized organizations to bridge that barrier, is to be able to actually cover all of these topics on their own. Now, the good news for any organization, enterprise or mid, you don't have to go at this alone. That's the good news, right? So there are organizations out there, right? So shameless plug, just like ours, that focus on this. That you can go out and actually seek guidance and work with to slowly peel the onion and get to the point where you can actually be not just compliant, but actually have your governance and have your responsible AI in place. Because I truly believe, and now there's some evidence that are coming out, that there's ROI from doing this responsibly. And that's a key message, I think, for C-suite as executives, that they have to think about ethics and responsible innovation as actually there is an ROI behind it. it's not always directly tangible, right? It's not always in hard dollars necessarily. But over time, the organizations that are going to be really successful with AI will be those that are actually going to be on this path and will have responsible AI and responsible innovation in place. And those that probably are not going to exist are those that are going to end up in legal trouble, and because they didn't put any of this together, right? So that's kind of a little bit of a balancing act that organizations need to achieve, but a very important one to really think about and to not dismiss this as a check the box exercise, because it's not a check box exercise. It's actually pretty involved, and it needs to continue happening. It has to happen after you launch the system continuously. There has to be monitoring in place to make sure that everything is working as expected and as you design.
It's hard to put a dollar amount on reputational damage, which obviously is where this goes when you get it wrong, right? And I'm thinking, Alexander, because one of the concerns that we hear all the time from people when we're having conversations about AI is what is this AI tool doing with my data, right? So, in the old days, we talked about due diligence, third-party due diligence, and understanding the companies that you work with. And I would imagine looking at their privacy policies is probably very, very important. But I'd love to hear you speak on that component of it, because this is probably the question that gets asked of me more than any other question. And I think a lot of it came up with DeepSeek being a Chinese organization. People were concerned that any data that I use in this tool is going to flow through to China. So talk to us for a few minutes about due diligence and third-party risk.
Yeah. So we are finding that organizations at all sizes are significantly impacted in this area and are not prepared well. And the complexity arises from the fact, and you alluded to it, and I'll just summarize it, right? From the fact that you're not just dealing with one vendor. You bought whatever, your CRM in the past, you were dealing with that vendor for their tool. Now it's a vendor that connects with another vendor, and all of this passing of data, to your point, increases the risk tremendously. And we find that due diligence that is being done is really not good enough. So the way we look at it, kind of everything I've described over here, we look at it from the procurement standpoint as well, and we say, okay, how do we help organizations actually dig under the hood and take a look at not just the privacy policies of that organization, but how are those systems actually designed? How are they using the data? Are they actually integrating with another third party, and are they passing the data? That's a little bit difficult to do sometimes for procurement, because you can always claim, well, it's our intellectual property and so on and so forth. That's where a third party can come in and say, well, okay, we're not going to tell them your intellectual property. We're not going to tell these guys your intellectual property, but we need to see and understand what's going on. So that third party risk is now like not just a third party, it's a third party, fourth party, right? It's like all connected together. Yeah. It becomes really complex, and it's crucial, I believe, for organizations to seek that independent view, independent verification, at least until the point at which we have good stamps that somebody, when they are, let's say, ISO certified or something else certified, that stamp actually truly says we are not passing the data to a third party, or we are passing it. Here's the disclosure and exactly how we're doing it, right? But until then, I think it's really critical, and I'm happy that you're bringing this up, to investigate that and to boost that due diligence to the next level that is really deep look into the systems and understanding what the systems are actually doing with your data.
Yeah, thanks, Aleks. Agree 100%.
Yes, and just a couple of last questions real quick. One, if you could give one standout piece of advice to CEOs and product leads preparing an AI launch, what would it be?
My advice to them is start now. If you haven't started thinking about responsible AI and what it entails, you need to start now. You need to make sure that you're really carefully looking at it and thinking how to actually strategize with it. I was just on a call this morning with a prospect, actually, and I was blown away that they are actually thinking about all of this. They're using generative AI, and they said to us, we don't know what we don't know. We know we need to think about this. We don't know how to think about it. We need to help to understand kind of the full spectrum of what's needed there. And I applaud them. because I mean, this is a company that has already 10 million users on their platform. So I applaud them for saying that, right? Would have been better if they did it, you know, when they started, probably, but it doesn't matter. Like, so start now. If you're not thinking about it, start now. And don't wait for regulations. Don't wait for any of that stuff. Just think about, to Greg's earlier point, reputational risk, and the fact that even if there are no AI regulations, there's still other regulations that you could be violating. And start small, start thinking how to do this, how to implement it, and follow that. It's a 5-step process to kind of go through, and go through it, because I know for sure that organizations are going to be better off if they actually do that. So that's my advice.
Thank you so much. Very insightful. And as TrustVector evolves, what do you see at the next frontier in trustworthy AI? AI audits, certification, ethical standards?
Yeah, we're still, you know, there's a lot of work being done on ethical standards across the globe. We're lucky to be a part of some of those discussions and contribute to them. We're definitely, you know, excited and looking forward to actually getting some standards. Where we're really focused and really worried about is the agentic AI. We've had a privilege to be part of a community, global community, that is actually defining what safety when it comes to AI, agentic AI means. We've been talking about this for about a year and a half, way before the agentic AI started. But where we're really worried and we're really focused is, you know, everything we talked about right now, you know, you could somehow investigate, you could see what's happening. But when we have systems independently talking to other systems and then making decisions to then continue talking or making actions, losing your path and understanding what's going on becomes really, really difficult, and it's really, really risky. So all of the risks we talked about suddenly get really amplified, right? So we're really focused, and we're looking at that in that direction, seeing how do we actually make sure that, you know, regulations or not, that agentic AI is actually being deployed properly. Because once again, another application of wonderful tools. I think it has many, many, many benefits, but if not used properly, it can be even worse than some of the issues that we have seen today. So that's where our head is thinking, how do we actually help organizations with that as well?
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And we absolutely believe in you and that you're going to achieve a lot of things. And Aleksandar, thank you so much for sharing such actionable insights today, especially with our community of Ukrainian engineers who are building AI responsibly from day one. To our listeners, please go and read the article of Aleksandar and see this article on those 5 critical evaluations. And Aleksandar, one final question. Where should folks connect with you and continue the conversation?
Yeah, I invite everybody to connect on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn, companies on LinkedIn. You can easily find me over there. Just search for my name and you'll find it. And follow us over there. We're working on, you know, releasing more of these types of useful articles to the organizations, and, you know, creating some other digital channels to actually help organizations kind of get on this path as well. If anybody has questions, they can also email us at info@trustvector.ai. Be happy to chat.
Yeah, and Aleksandar, we'll put the link to your article, 5 Critical Evaluations for Responsible AI System Launch, in the description to this video. So folks can just go right down to the description, click on it, and they can read it for themselves. It's a great article.
Thank you very much.
Aleksandar, Greg, thank you so much for being here. We are lucky to have you. And to our listeners, thank you so much for being here as well and listening to our podcast. And until next time, stay thoughtful, stay brave, and stay AI tuned.